Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Barbara. And I want to thank Barbara, Luciano, all the people who work so hard on WYOU. It's a labor of love, and I'm here today really out of respect for the people who are so committed to making WYOU work. And I think it's appropriate that somewhere at the bar right now ordering a triple vodka screwdriver is Norm Stockwell. And Norm, of course, works at WRT, and I think we're here to talk about community media, and it's impossible to talk about community media without discussing not only WYOU, but WRT, that they are sisters and brothers in the effort to build a strong media culture in a community. They have a complementary relationship. Before I get started, I was struck, Barbara, when you talked about the Cable Competition Act. Historians 1,000 years from now are going to call this the golden age of irony. Any law like that gives the politicians give it a name like Cable Competition Act, you know it means the exact opposite. So that means it's written by AT&T. It's the Cable Monopoly Act. Any group for a vibrant, strong economy, that means it's a group to screw over workers and tank the economy. So this is the golden age of irony today. You know, it's interesting. Public access TV and WRT are the same age. They're both 37 years old. And that's not an accident. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the reason why that's not an accident. And the reason is very simple. Starting in the mid-1960s, there was a huge upsurge of political activism in the United States, as I think we all know. The Black Power movement, Civil Rights movement, student movement, anti-war movement, a whole variety of activist movements that coalesced and went a long way towards changing how this country was operating at the time. And right around the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of this energy shifted to media. And a lot of people said, why do we have such crappy television and radio in this country that doesn't really reflect the people in this country and what they're interested in? And it became very concerned with getting better television stations, getting different types of voices having an opportunity to be heard. And as a result of this immense amount of activism, some of it associated with people like Ralph Nader, but a lot of it associated with the Civil Rights Movement, we had the creation of public access television. That was something this movement got created. It wasn't handed to us by someone in Washington as a favor. It was a victory we won by struggling, saying communities need their own media. Likewise, community radio stations in the early 70s were created by the government and made available to places like Madison, Wisconsin, not because someone in Washington said, gee, let's be nice to Madison and other cities and give them a community radio station. It was the result of a sustained, aggressive battle on the part of activists in the early 1970s to create channels for non-commercial, nonprofit use run by people in their community. And without the social movements of that period, we wouldn't be here today. WRT wouldn't exist, WYOU wouldn't exist, none of this would exist. We're all the result of an era of sustained political media activism. It was also during that period, just as a little more history for you, that all the commercial radio and TV broadcasters in the United States operate with a government monopoly license. The government gives them a license to a frequency over which no one else is allowed to broadcast, and the government protects that monopoly right. And the companies get that monopoly right. And in theory, I know this is going to seem like a punchline of a joke, in theory they get that monopoly right from the government at no charge because they're serving the public interest. They're doing something for the public interest that they wouldn't do if they were purely commercial undertakings. That's the theory. In practice, of course, it never worked like that. The dominant commercial broadcasters in radio and TV had far too much political leverage, so they never had to be worried about losing their license. I mean, the licenses would be renewed every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or whatever the length would be, automatically, without any contest. In the early 1970s, late 60s and early 70s, for the first time, there were hundreds of organized community challenges to broadcast licenses. And it really scared the bejesus out of broadcasters for a while because it was gunking up the whole system. They'd never had the public play any role whatsoever. And suddenly these challenges were coming in. The most prominent ones were coming from civil rights groups. You had situations in southern states where you had, the community, the TV stations we're in would be 60, 70, 80% African American. And you'd have all the stations basically refusing to show anything about African Americans on their station. It was simply apartheid of even, I doubt South Africa could have equaled the apartheid of American broadcasting television in this era. So that's the history we come from. And one last bit about the history you should all know. There was a very famous Supreme Court case, one of the great cases in Supreme Court history, called Red Lion Broadcasting from 1969. And in that case, a commercial broadcasting company went before the Supreme Court and said, I'm a commercial broadcaster, I own a radio station, and the government should have no right to tell me what to do because I have a First Amendment right to do whatever the heck I want on my channel. Coincidentally forgetting that it was a license they got of public property, assuming it was their private property. But that's an aside. They didn't want to emphasize that. And the Supreme Court, in one of its great decisions, rejected that argument and said that broadcasting belongs first and foremost to the people of the country, not to the people who own stations. And the people of the country have the right to construct any broadcast system they please. That's their democratic privilege. And the media should be run democratically. A revolutionary decision. It wouldn't make that decision that came up today. Let's hope that they don't revisit it. But in 1969, it really set the tone of how people thought that they had the right to aggressively recreate media, that it was their right, not just their duty, an obligation, an option, but it's even almost a requirement and a responsibility. If you were serious about a just society, you had to create community media, nonprofit, non-commercial media. You couldn't simply have a commercially run, advertising-marinated media system and have a healthy society. So that's the background. That's why these great institutions were born when they were. And that's why we struggle to keep them. And that's why ultimately, if these are going to become truly great institutions with great resources and even more hold in our community, it will be as a result of similar social movements coming back that will empower our media again. They walk hand in hand, the strength of our social movements and the strength of our community media. Now, I just want to take a few more minutes to talk. Welcome, Ruth. Hi. A few more minutes to talk and hand it over to Ruth and then Laura. About one of the great arguments that people have made for the last 25 years about how we don't really need community media anymore, that their day is done. That was 70s stuff. That was great back then. But now we have the internet with its gazillion websites, and that has solved all the problem of corporate commercial media because anyone can go online and do their thing, and they can't whine because there's no scarcity anymore, so you don't need to have a community radio station or a public access television station. And I think that argument, which was dominant in the 1990s and still has a lot of currency today, has been exposed pretty much as fraudulent and ridiculous. And the reason for that is that the internet, ironically, and here's a lot of irony tonight, has proven that it's really best at generating monopoly, not competition. We had all this talk about how we're going to have a gazillion websites and everyone's going to be cruising the internet, and anyone who had something good to say would find an audience, and the corporations would all be out of luck. Instead, what we find on the internet is due to network effects. The internet is the dominant websites that get almost all the traffic, 75% of it, are controlled by a very small handful of companies that are, by economic terms, what we call monopolies. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, eBay. These are companies that all have global monopolies equal to or greater than what John D. Rockefeller had with Standard Oil in the late 19th century. Their market share is so great. They have these huge gusher monopolies, which they're using to dominate the internet, the relevant internet. And it's virtually impossible for a small person to get a way in as a result, to be commercially viable, so you can actually pay bills and eat and have a roof over your head. Now, you want to volunteer at midnight and write something that no one's going to read, that's a different matter altogether. But we've always had that right. You can stand on a street corner and scream and have no one hear you. We're talking about media that actually has some value in the sense that you have an audience and a relationship in a community. And that the internet has not, unfortunately, produced at all. Especially where the internet has been most devastating has been for local media. Because what the internet does, because it collapses space entirely, is it ruins the local. There is no localism in the internet. That's why there are no local bookstores. Everything's done on Amazon. Amazon can run much more efficiently as an international network, which it is. It can outcompete any local store. Any local store. This is the truth. I hate to say it. I take no pride in saying this. You should support your local bookstore, but they can't compete with Amazon. That's just the nature of the economics of network economics and capitalism. And they've killed local bookstores. And the same thing is happening with local media over and over. It's been devastating. And what I think we've learned, though, after 20 years of the internet, is that as a result of this, if the need for community media, for nonprofit, non-commercial media, rather than being eliminated by the internet, is elevated by the internet. It's greater now than ever before. And what's striking to me is in countries and communities that have healthy community media, like Madison, but especially when you get outside the United States, this is becoming increasingly clear. I was in Sweden last week for a week at a journalism conference, and 10 years, 15 years ago, Sweden's public broadcasting, which across the political spectrum is regarded in Sweden with the highest possible praise. Swedish public broadcasting, they thought, would have to go under, because now who needs public broadcasting when everyone can get a website and do their own thing? Well, today it's stronger than ever because people have seen that that website baloney just wasn't cutting the mustard. And if we had the same subsidy or investment by our government in public and community broadcasting that they have in Sweden on a per capita basis, the subsidy the United States would be paying would be $35 billion a year. That's how serious Sweden takes public media. We currently spend $400 million, just so you get a sense of the difference. They spend almost 90 times more than we do per capita on supporting nonprofit and non-commercial media, much of it journalism. And they're not going to let it go. It's the reason they don't have the media system we have today, and they understand that, is that subsidy that they make. And I think that, that is really where we should all start with here, understanding the crucial role that community media not only still play, but play more than ever today. Technology doesn't eliminate the need for community resources. I'll just say a couple other things, and then I'm going to turn it over. First of all, the idea that there's a distinction between old media, television or radio, and new media is increasingly moot. And you should purge that from your brain. All media goes digital. Some media also is old media. Some media is also radio and television. WYOU is online. WRT is all over the internet. So that distinction is irrelevant at this point. The progressive is online, and it's also old media. So we should forget that notion that there's some distinction there. There really isn't a meaningful distinction, except that people who still have old media might make it income. It might actually have resources like the progressive. The progressive is just online. It would be, Ruth, you'd be looking for a job. It wouldn't, like most websites. That's simply how it works. And the other point I would make is that what you see with community media, and it's true in Sweden, it's true in the United States, it's true everywhere in the world, is a healthy community media system has many components. Enough quantitative increase in the units creates a qualitative change. So the communities that have the best community media, non-commercial, nonprofit media cultures in the United States are Madison, the Twin Cities, I think, Bay Area. And what marks all of those areas is they have several community and public radio stations. They've got publications. They've got public access TV. Like here, we've got the Progressive. We've got all sorts of great stuff in addition. We've got the Center for Media and Democracy. You've got all these wonderful institutions. You create a critical mass, and you attract people, and the vitality, the creativity, the community increases. And so when we look at supporting WYOU, as I hope everyone in this room will do, and I suspect you will do, it doesn't mean, well, we're supporting that in competition with the Progressive Magazine or WORT. We're doing that in conjunction with it. That this is a tide we raise for everyone. And when you create that critical mass, it makes it easier then for another community medium to get started, because there's a culture and a tradition in the area that this is something you stand by. This is something you support. It'd be much harder to start a community medium in a city with no tradition whatsoever, where people had no idea what this is all about. And that sometimes is counterintuitive. People think, well, gee, there's already public community media. We don't need any more. We got plenty, and we'll just fine with our one or two things. Or if you go someplace that has none, you could just start one. It'll sprout because it'll be such a desert there otherwise. It's not that way. So you should be supporting all. We need to keep all our institutions strong and vibrant and keep them going. And in a way, what it's like is we're like the book people. If you've ever read Fahrenheit 451, in sort of the hard times, our community media are preserving a sense of culture and of media and of society is not just being about turning people upside down and shaking the money out of their pants, but something we create together. It serves us. We participate in it, and waiting for that day that's coming, that we're in, I hope, at the beginning of, and sometimes 2 years ago I thought we were in the middle of, when we will have the same social movements that spawned these great institutions in the first place. And then those days, the book people will actually be in the middle of everything again. But we have to keep these great institutions alive, or else we're not going to get to that day again. These institutions are central to our survival and the survival of democratic and community values. So on that note, please do what you can to support these great institutions, WYOU and all the others. And thank you for coming very much. Let me turn it over to Ruth.